B, the Florida Evidence Code, had testimony yesterday from Corporal Bunner. The car with no visible handicap placard, State's Exhibit number for ID MMM will be a certified letter from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Vehicles indicating that no handicap placard has ever been issued to Curtis Reeves Jr. and State's Exhibit marked for identification OONNN. Same letter from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicle indicating that Vivian Lee Reeves, the wife of Mr. Reeves, has never been issued a handicap placard. Due to the fact that it's self-authenticating, we have the attesting certifications. I would move the state exhibit in as
48 and
48 and 49 respectively.
All right,
There's no objection on it. We offered to stipulate, but we're fine
okay.
with the.
They'll be admitted, thank you. Okay. Who's your next witness?
It will be Mr. DeYoung.
Mr. DeYoung.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I did.
Go ahead, Mr. Buck.
May Mr. Escobar and I approach
Yes.
the witness?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Counsel. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. DeYoung, would you state your first and last name for the records and spell your last name? And during our discussions, please direct your answers to the jury.
My name is Craig DeYoung, last name Dejonge.
Mr. DeYoung, how are you employed?
I am employed as a driver engineer paramedic for Pasco County Fire Rescue.
Okay. Let's talk about what that is, all right?
Sure.
All right. What is that title entail?
As a driver engineer, I'm in charge of the fire truck, the apparatus, driving to calls safely, using my paramedic skills on scene if needed, driving back to the fire station safely, general maintenance of the truck.
As we sit here today, how many years have you been with the Pasco Fire and Rescue?
I just hit 13 years back in December.
All right. Back in 2014, If you're 13 now, about 8, so you're about 5 or 6 years
Just over
back
5
then?
years, yes, sir.
You told us what the title means. Specifically, what are your duties as a driver paramedic? Give us the things that you do.
On a daily basis in the morning, I check out the truck. I make sure the pump works on the fire truck. I check all the equipment, make sure everything runs. Make sure all the medical equipment is in working order. Like I said, I drive to and from the calls safely. Park in the right manner where I'm supposed to. When we're on scene, I act as a paramedic and assist the paramedic on the ambulance with whatever he or she needs. And then we return to the station and wait for the next call.
As far as being the driver, did you receive any type of specialized training to perform those functions?
Yes, I had to take several courses and take a state certified fire pump test.
As far as being a paramedic, have you received any formal education to perform the duties of a paramedic on scene?
Yes, as a prerequisite to be paramedic, I had to do 1 semester of EMT school, roughly 3 to 4 months. Paramedic was roughly 1 year of schooling, and the fire academy I did it part-time, so it was roughly 8 months.
Okay. When you first began your career, did you begin as an EMT?
Yes, I received my EMT license, and then I worked for 1 year at a private ambulance company.
What is the difference between an EMT and a paramedic?
EMT is a lower level of service. If in a hierarchy, it would sort of go EMT, paramedic, nurse, doctor, sort of in a rudimentary way.
Okay. Then you became a firefighter?
Yes, I did EMT, firefighter, and then paramedic. Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's talk about this case. Let me direct your attention back to January 13th, 2014. Were you employed at the Pasco Fire and Rescue?
Yes,
Were your duties the same as we've just discussed as being a driver paramedic?
correct.
And what engine were you assigned?
Engine 16 in Zephyr Hills.
All right, where is that located?
It's on State Road 54 in between Dean Dairy Road and Eland Boulevard.
On that particular date, did you have an occasion to be dispatched to the Cobb Theater at 6333 Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Pasco County, Florida?
Yes,
Were you in engine 16,
yes,
and were you the driver?
yes.
When fire and rescue is dispatched and you get the call to respond, are you given the nature of the call as you're leaving?
Yes, we were actually not initially dispatched to the call. We were heading west on State Road 56, approaching Bruce B. Downs Boulevard. And we heard dispatch send engine 13 to a gunshot wound at the Cobb Theater, which naturally piqued our interest. So my captain decided to head right on Bruce B. Downs, head north towards the theater. And shortly after we were heading up Bruce B. Downs, the call was upgraded by dispatch to an active shooter with multiple patients. So naturally they put us on the call because we were getting closer to the scene, and we turned on our lights and sirens and started responding to the scene.
Now, while responding to the scene, was that call downgraded?
That's upgrading.
No. Before you got to the scene, was it downgraded from active shooter?
No, it came in as a gunshot wound and then was upgraded to an active shooter,
All right,
which means it's a higher level call.
I understand. When you were driving to the scene based on that nature of the call, what do you do with that nature of the call?
We turn on our lights and sirens, and we drive with more haste, safely and responsibly, but try to get there faster.
All right, I'm going to use some terms that I'm going to ask you to explain.
Okay.
In that situation, is it your practice to stage in an area until the area is clear?
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about that. The term when I use, do you stage in an area? What does that mean?
Stage it's an industry term to just park your apparatus at a distance far enough from the scene where it would be safe. You wouldn't be considered to be in danger. until you let law enforcement go into the scene, clear the scene of any danger, and then they deem it safe so that fire rescue personnel can come inside without fear of any threats.
And what does it mean until law enforcement clears the scene?
They would go in first and make sure there's no active shooting or threats, anything that would put our lives possibly in danger as fire rescue personnel.
While en route, did you receive any information that altered the plan of staging in the area?
I believe just before we got there, they said that law enforcement had deemed the area or the scene safe, so we didn't have to stage by the time we arrived there.
Okay. Now that you had that information, you're still going to the scene, correct?
Correct.
Where do you go?
We drove around the back of the theater where all the other units were.
At the rear of the theater, are there rear exit doors for each theater?
Yes, they appear to be like emergency exit exterior doors.
Is that the area that you parked in?
Yes.
Once you parked, what did you do?
We made our way by foot to the rear exterior door of the theater where the incident had occurred. We walked inside. There's a lot of commotion going on. When I had walked inside, the movie theater screen was to my right. Directly in front of me was Mr. Oulson being secured to a long spine board and to a stretcher by 3 or 4 EMTs and paramedics. They did not need any extra help. I looked up into the theater to my left, and Mrs. Oulson was being attended to by, I think, 2 paramedics, and they did not seem to need any help. So I made my way back outside to the outside of the theater and was sort of having small talk with my captain and my battalion chief.
Was that in the lobby area
No, that would be outside the theater.
or in the parking lot?
Parking lot, yes, sir.
All right. Once you were outside, did you become aware that there was an individual that may need some a medical attention because there was something in his eye?
Yes.
When you received that information, what did you do?
I was having small talk, as I said, with my captain and battalion chief, and a law enforcement officer came over and said something to the effect of, "Hey, the shooter or the suspect thinks he has something in his eye. Can you go check him out?" So I said, "Sure."
All right, what did you do?
I walked over to our engine 16 and grabbed our medical jump bag and proceeded to go over to the squad car where Mr. Reeves was being detained. There was an
Let
officer.
me ask you some questions. When you got there, was Mr. Reeves inside the marked cruiser?
Yes,
And was there a deputy with him?
yes.
And did the deputy assist Mr. Reeves in getting out of the cruiser?
Yes.
When he got out of the cruiser, did you notice whether or not Mr. Reeves was handcuffed?
He was.
If the person that you know as Mr. Reeves is in the courtroom today, would you point him out and tell me what he's wearing?
He's wearing a black suit, white short, and a kind of sort of gray and black tie.
We would stipulate the identification.
Thank you.
Once Mr. Reeves was out of the cruiser, let's just pretend this is the side of the cruiser, all right? Front tire, rear tire.
Okay.
Where was he in relation to the cruiser when he got out, front or the rear?
Towards the rear, the officer opened up the rear passenger door, assisted him out, and he was sort of standing in between the open door and the seat of the car.
Once Mr. Reeves was out, you had the background information, but did you ask Mr. Reeves what his complaint was?
I believe he said he thinks he has something in his eye.
Was Mr. Reeves wearing glasses?
Yes, he appeared to be wearing prescription glasses.
When someone indicates they might have something in their eye, what is the first procedure that you would do? We'll talk about what you did, but just typically if someone says, "I think I got something in my eye," what do you do?
First, I personally removed his glasses, put them on the trunk of the car.
All right.
Observed his eye. I didn't see any redness. I didn't see any foreign objects. I didn't see any lacerations or abrasions, anything like that. The sclera, the white part of his eye, was white. I didn't see anything inconsistent with what I would find with a man of his age.
All right. After you made that visual observation, what was your next step in order to treat the complaint? Way to put it, I guess.
I took a bottle of clean, unopened bottle of sterile water, removed the shrink wrap top. The cap for the water is almost maybe like the size of a milk jug opening. So in order to not just douse his face and just drench him, I used a knife to kind of puncture a hole in the top to make it easier to flush, to irrigate his eye. And I had him turn his head to the left, and I flushed his eye kind of from the bridge of his nose downward through his left eye, and then the water fell onto the ground.
All right. And the complaint was there was something in his left eye.
Correct.
Right. And that's the only one that you irrigated with the water,
Yes.
flushed out?
Yes.
How many times did you do that?
2 or 3 times.
Again, that would be a normal treatment to make sure, or at least try to get whatever might be in there that you can't see out of the eye.
Yes, sir.
After you did that 2 or 3 times, did Mr. Reeves make any statements to you as to whether or not he thought your treatment was effective?
I had said, yeah, is that better? Did that help or something like that? And I think he made the statement of something. I think there might still be something in my eye.
All right. You indicated that you removed his glasses after performing the treatment that you just described. What did you do with the glasses?
I then put them back on his face.
In relation to Mr. Reeves, when you're doing the flush, how close are you to Mr. Reeves?
Fairly close. I mean, it's kind of a personal procedure. You have to get kind of
May I
near
just
them.
ask him to step down a moment? Sure. Just step down a moment. Just pretend that I'm Mr. Reeves and you go do the procedure. Tell me how close you would have to get.
Probably about this close. I'd have you turn this way and I'd kind of flush like this.
Okay. Ryan, have a seat. While in that close proximity that you just demonstrated, did you make any observations about his face that would indicate to you that he had any bruises, lacerations, redness of any type along his face?
I did not notice anything, no.
All right. And during that same time period, when you're flushing out the eye, as far as the left temple area and the right temple area, did you see anything that would indicate any type of cuts, bruises, lacerations, abrasions of any type?
No, I did not see anything that stood out.
I have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Now, when you performed this procedure, as we call it, you were standing up?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so Mr. Reeves is standing up.
Yes, sir.
He's taller than you are.
I don't recall. He might have been.
Okay. So you don't really recall physically how this went?
I remember flushing his eye out. I don't remember our height differences, though.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is you can understand, if somebody's sitting, then it's pretty easy. You walk up to them, they turn their head, and you're kind of above them, right?
Correct.
If they're taller, they might have to stoop down. Do you remember if that happened here or not?
Not specifically, no.
Now, the saline solution, you run it, I think, from the nose to the eye. Is that how it goes, from the nose down?
Yes, sir. Yeah, you don't want to flush from the affected eye the other way because you could then affect the other eye. So you want to go from the bridge of the nose through the affected eye and leave the other eye unaffected.
And so that's why it was tilted sideways?
Yes, sir.
For the left eye?
Yes, sir.
To drain out?
Yep.
If there's anything in there?
Correct.
Or take out whatever is in there?
Correct.
Now, when somebody tells you they have something in their eye, I've been to the doctor's office and they take your glasses off and they go like this, they put a light and all that. You didn't perform that sort of thing here.
No, sir.
You just visually looked,
Mhm. Yes, sir.
is that right, to see if you could see anything?
Correct.
You didn't manipulate the eye at all?
No.
You just asked Mr. Reeves, I would imagine, to open your eyes?
Yes.
Okay. And that's so you can put the saline in?
Yeah. Sterile water.
Sterile
Yes.
water, I'm sorry. Yeah, saline would probably not be very
Yes.
comforting.
Sterile has a low salt content in it.
Okay. And so, in this case, you described taking off Mr. Reeves's glasses?
Yes, sir.
Right? And that's so you can get to the eye?
Correct.
Because if his glasses were on, you wouldn't be able to get to his eye.
Correct.
And then, when you performed this procedure, the prosecutor asked if you saw any injuries. Well, in your line of work, you're looking for something. You're not looking for redness, for instance, right?
I could see redness there. I could see lacerations, abrasions, bruising, anything of that matter.
In this case, certainly, you didn't ask Mr. Reeves to close his eyes so that you could look at his eyelids, right? That didn't happen here.
I don't believe I did, no.
All right. In this case, frankly, you had his eyes as wide open as possible.
Yes, sir.
Was Mr. Reeves wearing civilian clothes or something else? Do you remember?
I believe he's wearing civilian clothes.
Do you remember what color shirt?
I want to say blue, but I'm not positive.
Okay. Once you run the saline out, you say that Mr. Reeves tells you there still feels like something's in his eye, right?
He said something to that effect, yes.
And again, with just kind of you visually looked, or you were done after you flushed it 3 times?
I flushed it. I may have looked again, I'm not sure. And then I put the glasses back on his head, and the officer assisted him back into the car, shut the door. And
All right. So in terms of actually looking at him a second time, we can agree you may have, but you may not have.
I don't remember specifically seeing anything that I didn't see the first time.
Well, do you know for sure that you looked a second time?
No, I'm just going off my memory.
All right. Did you write a report in this case to help you?
I did not. The first incoming engine is tasked with writing a report for the call.
And did you review that report before you came here?
I did.
Okay. And is there anything specifically in there that you looked at his eye a second time?
No, sir.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. As far as the state's concerned, you can do that.
Does he need to be on standby?
Keep on. We have some people as well. You know.
Okay.
You can be on standby.
Mr. DeYoung, you're free to go today. I'm assuming they have your phone number. Should you get called back, you will have to come back, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Be Detective Keaney.
Swear to affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause, believe the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you would, please state your first and last name for the record, spell your last name for the court reporter, and please direct all your comments to the jury box. Would you state your name, please?
I'm Detective Todd Keaney, Koenig,
Detective, how are you employed?
with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office?
A little over 21 years.
Just so we can do the math quickly, while we're back on January 13th, 2014, that would have been, what, 16, 17 years?
Yes.
As we speak today, What unit are you in?
I'm sorry.
As we sit here today, what unit are you assigned to?
I'm in the Major Crimes 5 unit.
And what is that?
We work all violent deaths and internal criminal investigations.
In 2014, what was your assignment?
I was Major Crimes unit. We worked in that unit, robberies, any crime against person, including homicides.
You are in fact a sworn law enforcement officer,
Yes, sir.
certified by the state of Florida.
Yes, sir.
Let me take you back to January 13, 2014. Were you in fact employed as a sworn police officer by the Pasco Sheriff's Office?
I was.
Now, on that particular day, were you on duty or off duty?
I was on duty at the firing range for in-service training. We were at the Dade City range.
While, I'm sorry, let me start over. During your in-service training, did you become aware of an incident that was occurring at the Cop Theater at 6333 Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Pasco County, Florida?
Yes, sir.
How did you become aware of that incident?
I believe I received a text message or a call from my acting sergeant for the day.
Did you have a conversation that ultimately related to you being requested to respond to that area?
Yes, sir.
Did you in fact respond to the Cop Theater?
I did.
And approximately what time did you arrive?
13:40, 1:40 p.m.
Okay. Now, since you're involved with that particular case, is it the practice of the Pasco County Sheriff's Office to assign a unique case number or control number to that incident?
Yes, sir.
In this particular case, was it 14-001529?
Yes, sir.
Are all reports related to this particular incident referred back to that number,
Yes, sir.
including all evidences collected?
Yes.
And if you need to refer to your report to provide accurate information, as jury, just ask, and I'll ask the court for you if that's permissible. Okay?
Okay,
So
thank
if you
you.
need to refer to it, just ask.
Okay.
All right. Once you arrived at the scene, did you meet up with Detective Proctor?
I did.
At the point that you had that first contact with Detective Proctor, did you know his assignment?
I was aware that he was going to be the lead detective on the case.
Was there a request made by Detective Proctor for you to assist him?
Yes.
And how did you assist Detective Proctor?
He asked me to assist him in interviewing Mr. Reeves.
Did you in fact do that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Were you present when that interview took place?
I was.
Was it, the interview take place in a building or a vehicle?
A vehicle.
Were you also in the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
Where were you seated in the vehicle?
The back passenger seat.
And the individual being interviewed?
Was in the front passenger seat.
If the individual that was in the front passenger seat that was being interviewed by Detective Proctor is in the courtroom today, would you point him out, tell me what he's wearing?
He was
Yes.
stipulated, Your Honor.
Okay.
Was the interview recorded?
Yes, sir.
And prior to coming in the courtroom today, did you listen to that recording?
I have.
Did you recognize your voice on that recording?
Yes, sir.
What I'd like to do is talk about your observations during the interview. We're not going to go through the interview itself.
Okay.
I just want to talk about the observations you made of Mr. Reeves during the interview. In the vehicle that you were in, was there a visor in front of him in the front passenger seat?
The sun visor?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us whether or not that visor has what we, I guess, refer to as a vanity mirror?
Yes, sir.
While you were in the cruiser sitting in the back seat, was that visor up or down?
I don't know if it was down when we first got in the car, but it soon became down. I noticed it after we were in there that it was down.
All right. And when it was down, did you in fact could see the vanity mirror in the visor?
Yes, sir.
If you could, I'm going to be a little facetious,
Okay.
but this wasn't like a small Prius or something like that, right?
It was actually a Buick Enclave.
Okay, so we have a bigger SUV.
Yes.
All right. Can you give us, if you're sitting in the passenger rear and Mr. Reeves is in the passenger front, approximately what is the distance between the two of you?
2.5, 3 feet.
Right. During the course of the interview, are you able to look to your left, look to your right, or even scoot over to make observations of Mr. Reeves?
I was more leaned over most of the other interview, so I could observe that.
And during the time that you were in the vehicle during the interview, during that entire process, did you have an occasion, at least once, if not multiple times, to see Mr. Reeves' face?
Yes, sir.
Again, the same question, were you able to see the left side of his head, like the temple area?
Yes, sir.
How about the right side temple area, ear?
He moved around a bit, so at times I would see the right side as well.
And of course, I guess you're behind him, you can see the back of his head.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, during the interview, being in the proximity that you just described, at any time, based on your life experience, did you observe any type of injuries to Mr. Reeves' face, left side, right side, back of his head, that would give you concern that maybe he needed medical treatment?
I did not. I didn't notice any injuries at first. I then seen a red spot as he continued to rub his eye throughout
Okay.
the process.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's just back up a little, just one step.
Okay.
Okay. Saw no injuries.
Correct.
During the course of the interview, and of course you were watching Mr. Reeves,
Yes, sir.
did you see him touch his facial area with either his left or his right hand?
I did.
Was he wearing glasses during the interview?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead and tell us your observations during the interview that you saw Mr. Reeves do as he touched his face with either his left or right hand.
Okay.
What was he doing?
He was handcuffed in the front. We moved him from being handcuffed in the back when we moved him to our vehicle, handcuffed him in the front. And as he was talking about having something in his eye, he was rubbing his eye here and his temple area.
Okay. You kind of touched your eyelid. Is that what we're talking about, the eyelid
Between
area?
here and the temple.
Okay. How many times did you make that observation?
I couldn't give an exact number. I think it was several times.
Now, I know you're sitting in the back, all right? Did there come a point in time as you made those observations and it continued to occur that you were actually able to see the left eyelid?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to see Mr. Reeves' face before the interview began?
Yes. I assisted him getting out of the patrol vehicle and putting him into Alan's vehicle.
So I want to compare the two times. When you saw him the first time and the second time after you see the movement in his eyes, did you notice, if at all, there was any change to his physical appearance from the time you saw him the first time to the last,
I did see at the end there was a slight redness to his eye,
well,
and not at the first.
okay. Now you said eye, so I want to make sure the record is clear. You're talking about the fleshy eyelid as opposed to the glass obule of his eye, right?
Yes, the eyelid, and
Eyelid.
the temple area.
through your conversation with Mr. Reeves, did you become aware that a paramedic had performed the procedure of flushing out his eye?
He advised us that the fire rescue had done that.
Right. And did he also advise you he still felt there was something in it?
Yes, sir.
While in the vehicle, did Mr. Reeves make any other complaints of pain, discomfort, injuries, other than something in his eye?
He had stated his shoulder was hurting from sitting in the other patrol car.
Okay. So, a discomfort is maybe a way to describe it. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with that or disagree with that?
I would agree with it.
Can you tell us whether or not he ever mentioned that he had a headache or a throbbing in his head?
He didn't say a headache. I believe he said that he felt dazed at one time because he thought he got hit. But I don't think he mentioned a headache.
And again, having that information, did you make observations while sitting in the back of his face, left to right side, back of his head, that would indicate to you that some sort of blunt object, anything, caused any injury to Mr. Reeves' face, left side or right side?
No, sir.
After the interview was concluded, is it the policy and practice of the Pasco Sheriff's Office to process an individual who was involved in an incident like Mr. Reeves was, to take photographs and to take his clothes?
Yes, sir.
Did you in fact assist in that particular processing process?
I escorted him to the a different theater room and observed forensics to process him and photograph him.
The vehicle in which the interview took place, where was that parked?
We were parked in I want to say it was the northwest corner of the building, outside.
Okay.
Pretty much outside Theater 11, I believe it was.
Right. While outside, did you see helicopters overhead?
I did,
More than one?
yes.
From that observation, what decision was made to transport Mr. Reeves to the door of Theater 11?
Well, to protect him, everybody from seeing him, the media, I suggested to Detective Proctor that we drive closer to the theater door.
And is that what you did?
Yes, sir.
Once you were at the theater door, it's a fire door, right?
Correct.
All right.
Just an exterior door on the back
Someone
side.
let you in?
Yes.
Okay. While inside, did you meet up with a technician with the Pasco Sheriff's Office?
I did.
Who was that?
Susan Miller.
Once you were inside, tell us where you escorted Mr. Reeves so that forensic technician Miller could begin the processing of Mr. Reeves.
We just went in, it's a regular theater where they play the movie. We went into the seats and she started processing him right in the front part of the room.
While in contact with Ms. Miller, did you make her aware of your observations of Mr. Reeves as far as rubbing his eyelid?
I did.
And do you recall whether or not you made any special requests of Ms. Miller?
I did specifically ask her to take photographs of his eye because he was complaining that something was possibly in it.
Now, you were there the whole time?
Yes.
Did there come a point in time, let me ask you this, while in the theater, while you were present, did Mr. Reeves ask for any other medical attention?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No other medical complaints or discomfort
No,
that
sir.
you are aware of?
No, sir.
While the processing was taking place, did you eventually leave and someone else come in with Mr. Reeves to be with Technician Miller while the process continued?
I believe so. I believe I left before it was completed.
Ma'am, just moment, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
Detective, today, you're telling this jury that you observed Mr. Reeves rubbing his eyelid. That's what you told the jury just a few seconds ago, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you did that today under oath.
I did.
But what you actually saw Mr. Reeves doing is not rubbing his eyelid, but actually rubbing the corner of his eye, correct?
Correct.
But why would you tell the jury that he rubbed his eyelid when it wasn't that at all? It was the corner here of his eye. Big difference, isn't there?
No, it's not. This area here, between your eyelid is part, you're almost touching your eyelid as we speak.
Oh, so you think he almost touched his eyelid?
You almost touched your eyelid by
Did
pointing.
Mr. Reeves touch his eyelid or did he
He
not?
touched this area here between his eyelid and his temple. Yes,
So
sir.
he didn't touch his eyelid.
Yes.
Page 53. Lines 16 through 19.
Document.
Deposition. I was going to go through the predicate. You remember me taking a depo of you on July the 27th of 2015?
Yes, sir.
You remember that when I took your depo, you were placed under oath
Yes, sir.
and to swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
And were you telling the truth when I was deposing you on that date?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember the following questions and answer? Question, okay, he's rubbing the corner of his eye. Answer, correct. Question, not his eyelid. Answer, correct. Now, were you telling the truth back when I took that question and answer from you?
I was.
And I would imagine that in 2015, your recollection of what happened on January the 13th of 2014 would have been much better.
Maybe I misspoke back then on the depot.
You think so you think your recollection today in 2022 is better than your recollection was in 2015?
Should be the same.
It should be the same. You agree that facts are important, correct?
Correct.
And in our line of work, we can't be assuming things or speculating, correct?
Correct.
And we've got to get it right
Yes, sir.
because we have someone's life in our hands, do we not?
Yes, sir.
And the system of justice is depending upon witnesses to be truthful and accurate.
Yes, sir.
Now, when you assisted Detective Proctor that day, you were pretty much in the blind yourself. You didn't know any of the facts.
Correct.
You didn't even know that Joanna Turner had indicated.
Objection, hearsay, improper.
Approach.
May I, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Now, Detective, you had not even gone into the scene yourself to see any evidence that was present, correct?
Correct.
In fact, you didn't know anything about the alleged facts and circumstances of this case before you assisted Detective Proctor, correct?
Not the details, no.
And in fact, Detective Proctor was the one that asked you to assist him.
Yes, sir.
So in other words, you were basically an earpiece for him. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
correct?
Yes.
And nothing more. Now, you certainly don't have a medical degree, correct?
Correct.
You don't have a paramedic degree, correct?
Correct.
And so you don't know how to diagnose the human body to determine whether it's been hit with a blunt object, correct?
Correct.
Now, you said you saw Mr. Reeves's glasses. Mr. Reeves, do I have your glasses? You said you saw Mr. Reeves's glasses. Did you ask him to take the glasses off so that you could examine them?
No, sir.
So you don't even know what type of glasses he has, right? You didn't-
Approach.
Detective, you didn't take Mr. Reeves's glasses off, right?
Correct.
And you didn't do anything with the glasses to try to correlate the glasses with the redness that you had observed.
No, sir.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you never even asked Mr. Reeves whether, in fact, his glasses, would have moved to a certain
Excuse me, Your
extent.
Honor, I object.
Overruled.
You never asked Mr. Reeves, hey, what kind of glasses do you have to see if, in fact, they're flexible enough for them to cause some type of redness on your eyelid?
I did not.
Now, you were seated, you say, you were seated in the back passenger seat of this vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so describe the interior of the vehicle if you can.
You had 2 bucket seats in the front, 2 bucket seats in the middle, and a bench seat in the back.
No screen, no glass, no in between the front and the back seat.
No, sir. No
But
partition.
you were seated right behind Mr. Reeves,
Correct.
because you were there to listen,
Yes, sir.
is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you indicated on direct examination that somehow you were looking at Mr. Reeves while you were in the back seat.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and did anybody tell you to do that?
That's common practice of what we interview in a car. That's
Okay.
the position we get into.
And just to make sure for safety reasons?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's the reason you were in the back seat?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you indicated that when you were in the back seat, you noticed Mr. Reeves touching, I guess we've cleared that up now, right? This area right here.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
His eye, temple area, yes. Where you're
Eye
pointing.
and temple area,
Yes.
right? Where I'm pointing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just so the jury can see. And so you said that at some point in time later on, you were able to see a red mark on his eyelid. Is that correct?
On his eye area, in that
So-
corner.
So not on his eyelid, you're saying here again?
Your eyelid connects to your temple area in this bone area. He was
So-
rubbing right in the area that could be considered both. If I'm touching here, I'm touching my temple area and my eyelid.
You mean this corner?
Yes,
Okay, and so you didn't actually see him touching his eyelid?
not like this, no.
You didn't see him doing any of that?
No, sir.
Your Honor, I'm gonna ask that you be allowed to answer the question.
Yes, let him answer.
I will. You didn't see him doing anything like this with his actual eyelid?
No, sir.
Okay. And so the redness that you say, that you noticed, was in that corner area?
Yes,
And so that's why you had Ms. Miller actually photograph that?
yes, sir.
No further questions.
Redirect.
There you are.
May this witness be released, or he's on standby?
This can be released by the state, or, yes.
Okay,
We're going to keep him.
okay. Detective, you're free to go, but if you get called back, you have to come, okay?
Okay, thank you.
This is gonna go on an hour and a half. Take a short break. Who's your next witness?
It'll be Susan Miller.
Okay, yeah, should be a little longer. All right, let's take a 10-minute recess. Please remember my instructions during the break, and be back to the jury pool room in 10 minutes.
All right, we're going to recess for 10 minutes. Jury is out.
can be seated, thank you. Hey, Tina. Tina. Are you going to ask number? Bring them in. Good. And who's next?
Forensic science.
Oh, Susan Miller, that's right, you said that already, I'm sorry, yes.
Through the jurors, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Jurors enter the courtroom. Jurors may be seated. Jurors seated and accounted for.
Thank you, Deputy. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess?
Yes.
All right, thank you once again. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Honor Counsel. Today calls forensic science investigator Susan Miller.
Raise your right hand. Take the oath.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
So comfortable and scoot right up to the mic. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you would, please state your first and last name for the record, and please direct all your testimony to the jury box. What is your name?
My name is Susan Miller,
And spell your last name, please.
Miller.
All right. Now, Ms. Miller, did you do a report in this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
In the event that you feel like you need to refresh your memory from that report, please tell me, and we'll get the court's permission for you to do that. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Very good. Let's go ahead and begin. How are you employed?
I am a supervisor in forensics at Pasco County Sheriff's Office, and I'm also a human remains detection canine handler.
Okay. How long have you been a humans remain canine handler?
Approximately 3 years.
How long have you been a supervisor?
7 years.
I'm going to take you back to January 13, 2014, as far as your employment. In the beginning of 2014, January, did you hold a supervisory position?
I did not.
And how long after January were you appointed as supervisor?
It was approximately a year later.
And was there another individual who was also promoted or assigned as a supervisor approximately the same time?
There was, yes. Her name was Nancy Steffens.
Explain to us the training that you've received in order to carry out the duties as a forensic science investigator. We're going to really not talk about the canine part. That wasn't involved in this case, right?
That's correct.
That's something just in the last 3 years?
Yes.
All right, very good. So let's just concentrate on the training that you had under your belt, so to speak, in 2014. What was it that allowed you to perform the duties as a forensic science investigator?
So I had completed the forensic technology program in the year 2000, and I was hired directly after finishing that program, and so I've had approximately 1,000 hours of on-the-job training since then.
And what does on-the-job training include?
Going to various trainings through different disciplines, but photography, documenting crime scenes in general, processing, etc.
Do your duties include photography?
They do.
Are you assigned a particular camera?
I am.
Now, in 2014, that's what we're going to be talking about. Were you assigned a particular camera?
I was, yes.
As far as the collection of evidence, you didn't collect any evidence at the scene at Cop Theater, correct?
Yes, I did collect evidence that day.
Photographs?
I took photographs, yes, I did.
Okay. And I'm talking about inside Theater 10.
Oh, no, sir, I did not.
I apologize, that was my fault. Okay. You were in another theater.
Correct.
All right, I'm sorry. Okay. So let's make sure we get that straight. In Theater 10, you did not participate in that process in Theater 10.
No, not of the evidence collection or photography, no.
Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about January 13th, 2014. Were you employed as a forensic science investigator on that particular day?
Yes, I was.
And your duties as you have just described?
Yes.
Did you have occasion to respond to Cop Theater at 6333 Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Pasco County, Florida?
I did.
And do you recall approximately what time you arrived?
Approximately 14:29.
All right. For those of us that aren't familiar with military time, could you convert that for us?
2:29.
Were you given a particular assignment upon your arrival?
Yes, upon arrival, I was directed to the back of the theater.
You were,
I was directed to the back of the theater to meet with Detective Proctor.
okay. Was that Theater 10 or Theater 11?
It was the adjacent theater to the east, so I believe that was 11.
Okay. Did you in fact go into Theater 11?
I did.
While in Theater 11, do you know what your assignment was going to be?
It was to document the individual that Detective Proctor was interviewing.
Okay. Do you in fact write a report about what you do?
I do, yes.
And is that report assign a unique case number with Pasco Sheriff's Office being 14001529 for this event?
That's correct.
And your report and all the evidence you collected is under that number?
Yes, sir.
All right, we have you inside theater number 11. Does an individual that was later identified to you as Curtis Reeves brought into theater number 11?
That's correct.
And if you recognize the individual that was introduced to you as Curtis Reeves, if he's in the courtroom, would you point him out, please?
Yes, he's a gentleman sitting at the table there.
Okay.
Lots of gentlemen.
Let's be a little more specific. Would you
Excuse me.
please tell us at least coat color?
Stipulates no identification.
Thank you.
In this particular case, were you aware that the event in the theater included a shooting?
Yes, I was.
Now, in that type of situation, is it normal practice for you to process individuals that were part of that event,
Yes, sir, it is.
whether they be a witness or a person of interest?
Correct.
And can you tell me whether or not that normal process would include photographing and, if appropriate, the collection of items of clothing the person you were processing was wearing?
Yes, that would be correct.
We have you in Theater 11. Mr. Reeves is brought into Theater 11. What was your intention at that time, knowing that Mr. Reeves was a person of interest?
My intention was to photograph the individual and to collect swabs from the hands, to collect a GSR kit, do fingernail scrapings and cuttings, and then collect the clothing.
Now, we're going to get some administrative stuff out of the way real quick, so we can just concentrate on your testimony, okay? You indicated that you took a swab.
That's correct.
All right. Would that be a buccal swab?
I did, yes.
Explain to the jury what a buccal swab is.
A buccal swab is simply a large Q-tip that we use, and we go along the inner lining of the teeth and gums, and that's for the collection of cells to be used at a later date and time.
Is the swab a sterile swab?
It is, yes.
Once that collection is made, first of all, how do you handle the sterile swab? Is it just like a cotton ball? Is it something on a stick? That's why give me a visual.
Oh, it's like a Q-tip, a large Q-tip.
All right, very good. Now, once that's the material is collected by swabbing inside the mouth, what do you do with that?
Those swabs are then placed back into the package that they came in, and then that is sealed with evidence tape and then placed appropriately in a paper bag.
Now, because it's biological material, why do you use a paper bag?
Well, we use a paper bag because you want any kind of material that may be moist, any kind of biological material, to be in a bag that can breathe. So you wouldn't want to put it into plastic where mold could grow on it.
Okay. And did you, in fact, perform that function and take and utilize a sterile Q-tip and put it in Mr. Reeves' mouth?
That's correct.
And in the manner that you just described?
Yes, sir.
And did you subsequently put that into evidence?
I did.
Along with other items of clothing, did you have an occasion while you were there during the process to secure Mr. Reeves' shoes?
Yes.
And how did you secure those, and what did you do with them?
Once the shoes were removed, they were also placed into a brown paper bag and sealed.
Approach the witness, Sean.
You may.
Can I speak to Mr. Martin just for a second?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Approach the witness, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification with the letters G, G, G.
No, we would stipulate the admission of the evidence of that item whenever the prosecutor's ready to
All right.
request that of the court.
Thank you.
What's the next number in order?
50.
Okay. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 50. Would you go ahead and open the bag? Madam Clerk.
I forgot to.
Thank you. Would you like me to remove the item?
First of all, it's already in evidence. So is that Mr. Reeves' shoes that you collected?
Yes, it is one shoe.
One shoe.
Correct.
All right, will you go ahead and pull it up? And Your Honor, may the witness step down and allow the jury very briefly to look at the shoe, and so they make whatever observations they well make.
Yes, the shoe will be admitted as number 50, and she can show.
Of course, Your Honor, they'll get to see it later. Will you go ahead and place that back in the plan, please? You just stay right there. And now, after the clothes were taken, was Mr. Reeves provided some type of clothing to wear for the remainder of the processing?
Yes, he was placed in a Tyvek suit, which is just a white protective suit.
Now, prior to him being placed in that particular suit, did you do some photographing of Mr. Reeves?
I did,
And where did that take place?
within the theater.
When the photograph processing took place, did it begin before you seized Mr. Reeves' clothes?
Yes, it did.
Would the photographs that you took then depict the clothes he was wearing at the time he was brought into theater number 11?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, we mentioned that you had a camera, right?
That's correct, yes.
Is that particular camera digital or film?
That's a digital camera.
Let's talk about that just a little bit. That particular camera being a digital camera, can you tell us whether or not that camera, other than recording the photograph that is taken, along with taking the photograph, tell us whether or not it simultaneously records other data associated with that photograph?
Oh, it does. It records metadata.
All right. And what is metadata?
Metadata is information that more or less is embedded into the image. So you are able to look up some information such as your shutter speed or your ISO or the time and the date.
All right. When you say the time, what time are we talking about?
We're talking about the actual time of the picture being taken.
Okay, the actual time that the shutter opens and closes.
Correct.
It records the time.
Yes.
All right. Does that time have to be set manually when the camera is first put in use?
It does.
And in this particular case, was that particular camera, whether you set it or someone else, was the camera set up so that when the picture was taken, the time of the photograph is recorded in the metadata?
Correct.
In this particular case, did you have occasion to look at the camera itself as far as the time was set and check it in some sort of way that you knew that you're in the afternoon, so the time was consistent with the time of day you were taking the photograph, consistent approximately with your watch?
Yes,
And-
that information was entered into the camera when I received it.
And was it consistent with the time of day and consistent with what you knew the time specifically was when you took the picture?
Yes.
Okay. As far as the setting, did you allow the camera to automatically set the setting for the lighting conditions, or did you manually set a setting?
It was automatic, yes.
And when you took the photograph, did you use any type of external flash?
I did have an external flash on the camera.
And explain to us what an external flash is.
Well, typically on a digital camera, you have a pop-up lens that's usually built into the camera, But if you need more lighting, there is an external flash that would be mounted onto the top of a digital camera.
All right. And does the automatic setting also control the flash,
It does,
the external flash?
yes.
Approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Your Honor, likewise with these exhibits, the photographs, defense has no objection to having those items admitted to evidence whenever the prosecutor is ready to request of the court.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels.
For the purpose of the record, I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit AAA, JPEG number 2116637. Marked for identification BBB, JPEG number 2116649. Marked for identification CCC, JPEG number 2116649. Marked for identification DDD, JPEG number 2116652. And finally, marked for identification EEE, JPEG number 2116637. Would you look at these photographs and let me know if you recognize them? Well, first, I'll give you a chance to look at each one of them.
Yes, sir, I recognize those.
Are those the photographs that you took on January 13, 2014, inside theater number 11 at the Grove Theater of Mr. Curtis Reeves?
Yes, they are.
And if the individual that you were introduced to as Curtis Reeves is in the courtroom?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would, next in order for AAA, just for the record, will be
51,
BBB, the exhibit number.
52,
Next in order is CCC,
53,
and I think I can figure it out from there. We'll just do it. So it'll be 3, the next in order will be 54, which is DDD, and the next in order, EEE, would be 55.
correct.
Your Honor, so to facilitate the use of the photographs, I'm not going to use the Elmo, but may I stand? And now that they're in evidence, may I have the witness step down? We'll publish the jury, and if I, with the court's permission, continue with the testimony with the aid of the photographs. Is that acceptable, Your Honor?
Like you're going to have her pointing to it as you go along, or?
No. Well, I'm going to have her point where the metadata is so they know what we're talking about. And then it's just, she took these photographs, but she needs to explain the metadata. That's something you don't normally get with a picture.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you can reposition if you need to.
Okay. All right, would you step down, please? And if you would stand right here, I'm going to give you State's Exhibit number 51. And who is that?
This is Curtis Reeves.
All right. Now, we talked about the metadata. Show the jury where that is and what we're talking about.
That's the information that is along the right side of the photograph. And as you can see, it has different delineations of the information there.
As far as the metadata on State's Exhibit number 51, at what time on January 13, 2014 was that photograph taken?
So this is indicating that the photograph was taken at 3:44 p.m.
Let me show you State's Exhibit number 52. Again, we have the metadata. Will you show that where the jury is?
The information is right along here, and it's depicting the same thing as the previous photograph. It's got the date and the time and other specifics about the photograph.
And what time does the metadata indicate that State's Exhibit number 52 was taken?
This one says it was 4:03 p.m.
Let me show you State's Exhibit number 55, and that is a photograph of who?
This is a photograph of Curtis Reeves.
Taken on January 13th.
That's correct.
And that particular photograph depicts what part of his body?
This is the frontal view of the torso as he is sitting in the seat of the theater.
All right. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 53. You show that to the jury, and who is that?
This is also Curtis Reeves.
And that photograph represents what?
This is going to be the left side of the face.
All right. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 54. Who is that, and what does it represent?
This is Curtis Reeves, and this photograph is depicting the right side of the face.
Okay. I want you to go back to 55. What color shirt is Mr. Reeves wearing?
This is a blue button-down shirt.
Okay. And then using State's Exhibits 54 and 53, was he wearing the same blue shirt in those?
No, sir. This is the white protective suit that I mentioned earlier.
All right. And so that was taken after you seized the clothes?
Correct.
And was that those two particular pictures taken contemporaneous, if you will, with State's Exhibit number 52, because we're seeing the white Kydex?
Yes, that's correct.
And let me ask you the same question with State's Exhibit number 55, comparing it to State's Exhibit number 51. We see the blue shirt. So State's Exhibit number 55, was that taken contemporaneous with the State's Exhibit 51?
Yes, that is correct. They're the same.
Have a seat. When I was introducing those photographs, you heard me refer to a number, and I said JPEG number. Remember that?
Yes.
All right. Explain to the jury where the state got that information. Why is that on that particular picture?
Well, that is part of the metadata from the camera that gets printed out on the side of that photo.
Every time the shutter flashes?
Yes, it has its own unique number, correct.
Okay. After completing that particular assignment, did you have an occasion to go to the medical examiner's office to collect evidence?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall that occurring a couple of days after?
It did. It happened on the Wednesday following.
For districts, for the medical examiner's office in this district, it covers Pinellas and Pasco.
That is correct.
Where is the medical examiner's office for this area?
It is located off Almerton Road in Largo.
And is that where you went?
It is.
Why did you go there on the 15th?
That was to respond down there and pick up items collected during autopsy, and bring them back to the sheriff's office to put them into evidence.
And is that your normal procedure?
It is, yes.
Now, had the autopsy already been completed?
It had been completed.
The evidence that you collected, was that collected by the individual performing the autopsy along with maybe members of the staff?
That's correct.
All right. Is there a procedure when you go to the medical examiner's office, when you go there to collect evidence, certain forms that you have to fill out and speak to a particular individual?
Yes, you have to talk to the lab personnel who will have you sign a chain of custody form for the items. And then upon coming back to the sheriff's office, an additional chain of custody form is filled out.
All right. As we mentioned with the Pasco Sheriff's Office, based on your experience in dealing with the medical examiner's office, does the medical examiner's office give each of their case unique number?
They do,
And you're provided with that number?
yes.
So you can cross-reference the sheriff's office number with the medical examiner's number to know that that particular evidence goes with this case.
That's correct.
Did you have make contact with a representative authorized to release evidence in this case?
Yes, sir.
All right. And did you in fact follow the procedure that you just explained?
I did.
Now, once you receive that, those items, do you repackage it in any way?
Yes, upon return to the sheriff's office, they are packaged in another brown paper bag, and then they are sealed, and then I am giving it an item number with my initials on it.
Approach, Your Honor. Let me show you State's Exhibit HHH, marked for identification, and State's Exhibit III, marked for identification. Would you look at the outside of the package and tell me whether or not you recognize that?
And again, Your Honor, the defense has no objection to the addition of this item.
Thank you.
Do you recognize both of those items?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize them?
It has the associated case number, the date, and it has my initials and the item number. It also has my signature on the bags.
Your Honor, based on the stipulation by Mr. Michaels, the state would move into evidence HHH next in order,
56,
and III.
57.
What I'd like for you to do, please, if you would, State's Exhibit number 57. Well, first of all, let me talk about State's Exhibit number 56. That's a buccal swab from the medical examiner's office,
That's correct.
and you know it to be from, the buccal swab was obtained by Chad Oulson, from Chad Oulson.
Yes,
You didn't do that.
I did not do
The
that.
medical examiner's office did.
That's correct.
Okay, so we'll just put that one aside since you didn't actually perform that. Let's look at III, which is, I'm sorry, 57. What is that?
This item is projectile fragments from chest.
Okay, would you go ahead and open that, please?
Yes.
Careful.
Let's do it this way.
Okay, inside that item bag, do you recognize the evidence that you picked up from the medical examiner's office?
Yes, I do.
All right. And how do you recognize it?
It is labeled with the medical examiner's identification number and tape.
Very good. Can you put that back in, please? And that is what?
So this is the projectile fragments from the chest. Do you want the shoes?
Yep. Put that back in the bag. a moment now. Clerk? Here's the photograph. Thank you, Mayor. One more time.
You may.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross?
All right, when you responded to the Cobb Theater back in January of 2014, you met with Captain Steffens, correct?
That's correct.
And he was kind of in charge of the forensic people at the scene.
Yes, sir.
And you were tasked with what's called processing Mr. Reeves.
Yes,
To process Mr. Reeves, you went to this movie theater that wasn't being used, it was empty,
that's correct.
and it wasn't the scene of whatever it was at that point they were investigating, correct?
Correct.
In terms of the number, you didn't know the number until the prosecutor told you today it was 11, right?
I knew it was adjacent to the theater that had been involved.
So 9 or 11,
Correct.
if
To the
they're,
east.
if they're numbered sequentially.
Yes,
Now, by processing Mr. Reeves, you collect his shirt,
I did.
the blue shirt we see in the photograph.
Correct.
You do some nail clippings,
I did.
right hand nail clippings and left hand nail clippings.
Correct.
And then what you do with the clippers, you actually preserve those too,
I do.
so that any of the potential biological information, DNA, et cetera, would be on the nails and also on the fingernails, on the fingernail clippers potentially, right?
That could be, yes.
Okay, and that's why you preserve that.
Correct.
You also did some scrapings under the fingernails,
Yes,
I imagine before you clip them.
exactly.
And then you do swabs of both hands,
Correct.
and you do a gunshot residue kit,
Yes.
which is essentially putting like little stickies, is that right, on fingertips?
Well, yes, what that is basically plastic canisters with an adhesive backing to them. And you use those canisters and you apply them to the backs of the hands and to the palms of the hands.
Okay, and in this case, you did just the right hand, is that right?
No, I would have done both hands.
Okay, and do you know that you did both?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also talked about this buccal swab. Let's talk a little bit about that. You described it as a Q-tip, and from what I've seen, it's kind of like, almost like a long, kind of wide coffee stirrer, right? Because it's flat.
Yes,
The item that you're collecting the buccal sample with.
correct.
And then the top is like a Q-tip, but again, it's flat and kind of wide.
It looks very similar to a large Q-tip.
Okay, but flattened.
Flattened, it has a little bit of substance there, cotton substance. I don't know that it's flat.
And that's because what you do is actually run it into the mouth, the gums,
Correct, yes.
the tongue, all inside the mouth, inside
All
the cheeks as
yes.
well, right?
Inside the cheeks, yes.
And that's to capture DNA.
Correct.
Okay, because that's what the buccal swab is used for. You do that collection so down the road, anybody who's wants to can use that as a sample to get DNA off of that.
Yes,
Okay. And in this particular case, you went to the theater kind of going into the back door as opposed to going into through the lobby and all of that.
yes.
And you encountered, you said Detective Proctor?
Detective Proctor
Okay, so Proctor is the one that guided you to Mr. Reeves?
and Detective Koenig,
Okay, they were together.
yes.
And so you take Mr. Reeves into this theater to process him.
That's correct.
And to take photographs is part of you processing Mr. Reeves.
It is.
And so in this case, what you do as a forensic investigator is you're gonna look over the subject that you're gonna photograph.
Yes.
Okay? And the things that you notice, you might make sure that you capture the best you can photographically.
Yes.
In this case, what you noticed was some redness on the eyelid of Mr. Reeves.
I did.
And that's redness that you noticed, right?
I did notice that, yes.
In other words, the detective didn't instruct you, hey, he's complaining of redness or he's complaining of an injury, look at that. This is something you did independently of anybody talking to you about it, right?
Yeah, I don't recall if there was any mention of anything like that, but I did observe that and I photographed it.
Okay, let me ask you specifically. Detectives did not point out the redness to you, right?
I don't believe they did, no.
Well, did they point out the redness to you or not?
Nobody.
She answered the question. Now it's argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you know for sure?
Your Honor, this,
I'll allow that. Overruled.
Do you know for sure?
I do not believe anybody pointed it out to me, no.
Okay. And certainly Mr. Reeves didn't point it out to you and say, my eye hurts, take a look at it.
I don't recall him doing that, no.
Well, did he?
I don't recall him doing that, no.
Okay. If I show you something, there was a hearing on this case a couple years back. If I show you something, would it help to refresh your recollection? Since you don't remember?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Page 960, line 15, court proceeding. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
All right. And I'm going to direct your attention to lines 14 through 24 to keep things in context for you, okay?
Okay, yes, sir.
All right. Your Honor, may I?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
What I showed you was some prior testimony. You recall that now?
Yes,
All
correct.
right. And so, in reading that and looking at that, you would agree with me that the detective did not point it out to you,
Yes,
the redness, correct?
correct.
And Mr. Reeves did not mention it to you, correct?
Correct.
It was your observation that led you to photograph the eyelid.
It was.
Nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect.
no, Your Honor.
May this witness be released?
You'll be released by the state, Your Honor.
About defense?
She's under subpoena, so.
Okay. All right, Ms. Miller, you're free to go today. Possibility you could get called back. You'll need to come if you do.
All right, thank you.
Who's next?
Dr. John Thogmartin. Approach, Your Honor, while the witness comes in.
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Doctor, if you would, state your name for the records. Spell your last name for the court reporter.
My name is John Russell Thogmartin, Thogmartin, first name Jon.
All right, sir. And if you would, during the course of our direct examination, if you direct your comments to the jury, and if you have an autopsy report with you, if you feel necessary to refer to it, please let me know, and we'll get the court's permission for you to do that.
Okay.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, let's start from the very beginning. What is your name,
John Russell Thogmartin.
and how are you employed?
I'm the District 6 medical examiner.
How many districts are there in the state of Florida for medical examiners?
24.
District 6 includes what area of the state of Florida?
It's the same thing as the 6th Judicial Circuit. It's Pasco and Pinellas counties.
Where is your office, where is the medical examiner's office located for the District 6?
It's in Largo, Florida.
Is that the only building within the district?
Yes.
And that services both Pinellas and Pasco County?
Yes.
Before we talk about you a little bit, let's talk about your lab. Along with the medical examiner's office, are there any other services that are provided out of that location?
Yes. The Pinellas County Crime Laboratory is also there, and I employ those people as well.
As far as the medical examiner's office, is your laboratory accredited?
Yes.
Explain to the jury what that is and the process you have to go through to be designated as an accredited medical examiner's office.
Well, our medical examiner office is accredited by the National Association of Medical Examiners. What they look at is, is your building good enough to meet the standard? Do you have sufficient staffing? Is your workload commensurate with your staffing? Somebody like me, do I have appropriate board certifications? Do my staff have appropriate board certifications? Mostly just a checklist of items that make sure that you produce your work in a timely manner and up to their standard. And it's the same thing with the laboratory, the forensic laboratory, the crime laboratory. They're accredited as well by another organization, and it's a very similar, stringent, scientific, and workload standard.
Are you periodically audited to make sure that you continue to maintain those standards?
Yes.
And since obtaining that accreditation, have you been audited?
Yes.
I'm going to break it down in two different areas. As we speak today, is your medical examiner's office accredited?
Yes.
Back in 2014, was it accredited?
Yes.
Now let's talk about you a little bit, all right?
Okay.
All right. Dr. Thogmartin, give us the training and education that you have to go through so that you meet the accreditation requirements to be a medical examiner.
Well, I have a degree in medicine. I graduated from medical school in San Antonio, Texas in 1990. I then did a 5-year residency in anatomic and clinical pathology, also in San Antonio in the hospitals there. Finished that in 1995. And then I moved to Florida to do fellowship in Dade County, Florida. They have a really good fellowship program there, so that's a 6-year postgraduate training. Finished that in 96.
Okay. And as far as the degree and as far as anatomical, you use a word that maybe not everyone in this courtroom might be familiar with. What is that?
Well, I'm trained in 3 areas of pathology, and I'm board certified in each of those areas. It's anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology. And it's really kind of neat how those are separated into each other. Anatomic pathology is diagnosing things in solid human tissue, like tumors, solid tumors, breast tumors, things like that. And then clinical pathology is diagnosing things in the fluids of the human body, blood, cerebrospinal fluid, urine. So clinical is fluid, anatomical is solid, and that's the way I divide it up. I think that's the easiest way to explain it. Now, forensic pathology is actually a subspecialty of anatomic pathology, and it deals with taking the autopsy and that you learn about, in medical school, applying it to traumatic cases, and then being able to present viable scientific testimony regarding those cases in court.
And you are board certified in each of those areas.
Yes.
What does it mean to be board certified?
You take a really hard test and you pass it, and then you're board certified.
Okay. In order to maintain your board certificate, is there a continuing education that you periodically have to go through?
Well, yes, for your medical license, you have to have a certain number of continuing medical education hours. All doctors have to do that.
As we speak today, are you currently licensed in Florida, and your license is in good standing as far as being a medical doctor?
Yes.
In 2014, the same question, were you licensed, and was your medical license in good standing as a medical doctor?
Yes.
When we talk about the services that are performed within the medical examiner's office, do you perform autopsies?
Yes.
We're going to talk about that in a little bit and define it. But is that part of your duties to perform autopsies?
Yes.
And how many do you think you performed as we speak?
5,000 plus is kind of my standard answer.
Okay. And back in 2014? Yeah.
It was about that. I mean, one time I did, many years ago, I counted up as I was at 3,500, so it's been quite a few since then. So I'd say 5,000 or so, maybe a little more by now.
Okay. In the past, have you testified and been allowed to render your opinion as to cause of death in a particular case?
Yes.
More specifically, regarding the cause of death, have you been allowed to render your opinion as to whether or not the cause of death was, in fact, a gunshot wound?
Yes.
And again, can you give us the ballpark about how many gunshot cases you've been part of and investigated?
There have been many gunshot wounds. Some of them are even multi-gunshot wounds. Most cases are suicide by gunshot wound, but it's one of the most common cause of death. I would say ballpark, it has to be near or around 1,000, I would say.
Right. When investigating as part of your performance as a forensic pathology, does each gunshot wound case you do give you an opportunity to confirm and learn how a particular projectile can affect tissue and bones within the body?
Yeah, every case, the gunshot wounds are similar, but you learn, basically what tissues are dense enough to stop a bullet, what it takes, with different calibers, and you learn a little something with every single case you perform.
Right. And would that also include those things that over the years and based on that experience, that as a forensic pathologist, as we speak today, you can assist the jury as far as determining the path and direction of a projectile through the skin?
Yes.
Okay, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, but that's how you acquire that information, is through years of experience.
Yeah, training, experience, education, yes.
We're going to spend some time talking about the autopsy and the finding in the autopsy. I will be using, and you will be using, terms that maybe not everyone in the courtroom is familiar with. Let's just spend a few minutes defining some of those terms that are unique to this case, so we have when I ask you the questions, we're all on the same page as far as the definition, okay?
Okay.
Okay. First of all, we use the term autopsy. Tell us what an autopsy is.
Well, an autopsy means to see for oneself. It's a medical, surgical procedure involving the external and internal examination of a deceased human body, and to try to determine why the person is deceased. It's that simple.
You mentioned to us what a forensic pathologist is. Can you just go ahead and remind them and expand on that just a little bit? Because that's the role you're playing today, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Well, a forensic pathologist is a medical doctor that basically works at a medical examiner office most of the time. And what we do is we're experts on evaluating injuries of the human body. Most all the time, those are on deceased people's. My current practice is virtually exclusively with decedents, 99.99% of the time, I'd say. So we do an examination, we do a full death investigation. So for a death investigation, you need to do an autopsy, of course, but also there's the information, the context of the death. So you could give me a gunshot wound to the chest, and it could be an accident manner. It could be an unintentional injury. Somebody could have been shot accidentally. It could be a suicide where somebody shot themselves on purpose, or it could be a homicide where another person shot them. You need the context of it to figure it out. And also it helps with directionality and also with cause of death. So you have to do a full death investigation involving circumstances and autopsy, and then we certify the cause of death. So we fill out a death certificate that gives a cause of death and manner of death. That's basically the whole job. And then I think we have sort of a public health role. What's your homicide rate in your area? What's your suicide rate? Are your drug ODs going up or down? What problem does your community have that's killing people? I think that's really one of our main purposes of spending public money and doing all this work, is to try to help people and improve the health of a community.
When we talk about an autopsy, and as a forensic pathologist, as the autopsy is being performed, are you documenting your findings, contemporaneous with what you see?
Yes, I use voice-to-text software, so as I'm examining the body, I'm doing a dictation, and it's putting it right into an electronic document.
Does the autopsy examination include both an external and an internal?
Yes.
Does the autopsy examination include not only report, but photographs?
Yes.
Now, let me talk about photograph just a little bit. You mentioned that 99% of your case is with a deceased. Is it acceptable and common practice that a forensic pathologist can use photographs and look at them and derive certain information from them as if they were looking at the body itself?
Yes, I mean, it's routine. For instance, I do the photographs because it's for preservation of what occurred at the autopsy, certain important aspects. You do the photographs that you may have to present in court. I mean, I could pass away in a car accident and not be here to testify. One of my colleagues would use my report and my photographs to testify in my place. So that's one of the reasons. And also we do the photographs as a demonstration in court to show people like yourselves what we saw. And they're demonstrative aids. They, represent what we saw. And it's pretty routine.
Right. Along those same lines, you mentioned that doing an investigation and placing things in content is important in your work, correct?
Yes.
Is it also acceptable for a forensic pathologist to use photographs of an injured party that that did not die, but was injured at the same time as the deceased to draw certain opinions and conclusions?
It's happened. It's not very often. I mean, my job is cause and manner of death, but I have been shown photographs of other people, like the ones around the other person, maybe the perpetrator, and they ask me, what do you think of these hands, or what do you think of this injury here? I mean, I guess the most common would be the person, like the suspect's hands would probably be the most common one, or somebody else was injured. That happens. It's not frequent. I'd say, a couple of dozen times in my career, maybe a few more.
Have you had the life experience of being involved in a case where there is, in fact, one gunshot and there's multiple intervening objects before the projectile finally hits the torso of an individual?
Yes.
And have you had the life experience in that same scenario where the intervening objects is not only an extremity of the deceased, but someone in close proximity of that individual?
Yes, I've had, other limbs, the person's own limbs, the person's own legs, doors, jewelry they're wearing, clothing, objects in pockets. So, when a bullet travels towards someone, it'll penetrate everything, unless it's like steel or body armor or something, eventually scrubbing velocity at every layer of something it goes through to eventually hit the person. So a lot of times bullets, I've had them go through walls and kill people. So many different possible scenarios on what it can or will not penetrate.
Would that also include extremities of other individuals close to the deceased?
It's happened, yes. Somebody else's hand is quite frequent. Sometimes people put even the shooters will put the bullet through their own hand. But the most frequent intermediate target, I think, is clothing, obviously. If you're wearing clothes are an intermediate target between the bullet and your body. I guess the next most frequent would be your own extremity, putting your hand up, the arm or leg is in the way, and the bullet goes right through your own arm and then into you. Through here is very frequent, and then into your chest. So that's probably the most frequent.
I mentioned to you, or asked you whether or not you've been allowed to render your opinion as to cause of death. Are you limited in as far as the cause of death, as far as how it's described? As an example, natural?
Yeah, cause of death is different. What you're describing is manner of death. So cause of death
I apologize, I used the wrong word.
Okay.
That's why you're up there.
Cause of death is, it's the illness or injury that leads to the physiologic process that results in death. So there's many of those: breast cancer, heart attack, brain tumors, bullet wounds, lightning strikes. So probably 1 billion of those. Different ways of wording it as well. But manner of death, you only have 5. And that's based upon the context of the death, or how the injury or lack of it. If there's no injury, it'll be a natural. But if there's an injury, you have manners of death that you can assign. There's 5 of them. One, the most common manner of death is natural. There's no injury. You died of natural disease, heart attack, cancer, brain tumor, stuff like that. Then there's homicide. One person killed you. Person's killed you. One person kills another. And then there's accident, car accident, lightning strike, shark attack. Those would be unintentional injuries, acts of God. So that's accident. Then the other is suicide. Somebody brings about their own death. They hang themselves, they shoot themselves. And then the last one would be, I can't assign a manner of death. I can't decide between 2 or 3 of them because I'm not sure if it's a suicide or an accident, or I'm not sure what occurred. I've got a skeleton laying out in a cornfield and they're just bleached bones. I have no idea what happened. So I will assign a manner of death of undetermined, or now it's being certified as cannot be determined. You just can't tell what the context was, or you can't tell between two different manners. And that's your limit. And it's a medical statistical determination. Vital Statistics in Jacksonville uses it to create a report that shows this county's homicide rate, for instance, or this county's number of accidents they have, things like that.
We're going to be using some terms, medical terms, and I'm going to ask you to define some of those that may come up during our direct examination. And there's no particular order. We'll just take them one at a time. Would you please explain to the jury and define what is a penetrating gunshot wound?
Okay. I classify penetrating gunshot wounds as the bullet goes in and doesn't come out. So there's a hole where the bullet went in, and inside the person is a bullet or bullet pieces. So it penetrated the body. If it goes all the way through, I call it perforating. So there'd be an entrance hole and an exit hole. It perforated the body.
Okay. I want to talk about body position. There's specific terms used in your profession, anterior and posterior. Explain to us what that is and the difference between the two.
Well, anterior is front, the front of the body, the face, the chest, the front of the legs. Posterior is the back side of the body, your back, the back of your thighs, your calves. So posterior, anterior.
When you get to the extremities, is there something you have to kind of keep in mind?
Yeah, I can show you if you want.
May he just step up so you can show the jury?
Yes, you can.
With the upper extremities, because we can do this with our forearms, we can move them. So if you're talking about anterior, it's the body in the anatomic position, which is palms forward. So all this is anterior. This is posterior. So this, when I'm describing stuff, everything is, the body is like this. So if I say right or left and anterior, posterior, keep in mind it's like this. It's the decedent's right, the decedent's left.
Along those same lines, let's talk about anatomical position. We're going to use that term describing certain locations and how people are. Tell us what anatomical position is.
I just did, I think.
Well, would it include leaning, squatting in different positions?
Well, when I'm describing the wound, I do it in the anatomical position, but, when the injury occurred, you can be in a different position. I mean, the human body is not the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz, standing like this, always in the anatomic position. The person can do this, bend over, twist, move their arms this way. So when I'm describing wounds and directions of bullets and stuff like that, it may not make sense unless you keep in mind I'm describing it anatomically, but what position were they in when the injury occurred may seem kind of confusing, but when you put it all together, now, I see how it went through here, then it hit here. It makes more sense when you consider the injuries in the description in the context of where the person was, how the person was positioned, where their arms were, and what they were doing when the injury occurred.
One of the terms we're going to be talking about is intermediate range grazing gunshot wound. I know that's a mouthful. Break it down for us and tell me what we're talking about.
I think a lot of these terms are unnecessarily complex, but it's kind of common sense. A lot of my work is nice in that it's common sense. Graze gunshot wound, that's very descriptive. It means that the bullet flying through the air grazed the skin. So it makes like a trough or a cut, gouges the skin. It doesn't fully go in the body. It just causes a skin wound or soft tissue injury. Now, if there's ones that'll almost go in and kind of tunnel under the skin, but then there's ones that just touch the edge of the skin, and there's certain characteristics of that. And when you're talking intermediate range, so we have types of wounds: penetrating, perforating, and graze. When you're talking, then you talk range of fire. There's 3 ranges of fire that forensic pathologists describe, and that's what we see on the skin. We base that on the skin and the body. You have contact range, where the muzzle's pressed up right on the skin when the gun is fired. The muzzle of the gun is right there on the skin. And then you have intermediate range. That's where the muzzle's away from the skin. Maybe like, say, half an inch or an inch away. And all the way out to 18 to 24 inches, that's intermediate range. And then beyond 24, 18 inches, you have distant range, or we call it undetermined range. And I can explain each one of those.
Okay. Another term we're going to be using is stippling. Tell us what that is in your profession.
Stippling is it's also called powder tattooing. And it is a hallmark of an intermediate range gunshot wound. And the reason that you have stippling, also known as powder tattooing, associated with an intermediate range gunshot wound is that when a gun is fired, obviously the bullet comes out. Pretty common sense. But there's gunpowder that has been ignited and it is burning and it's creating gas that pushes the bullet out. So out of the muzzle comes bullet, out of the muzzle comes flame, out of the muzzle comes gas, and since the guns are not 100% efficient, they don't burn all the powder. There's also pellets or little fragments of powder that come out. Some even come out slightly ahead of the bullet. But so you have the bullet coming out, and then I have this dust of powder particles that come out. And they have energy. And if the gun is sufficiently close to the skin, the bullet will go through and the powder will hit the skin, embed in the skin, and actually make a tattoo, very similar to getting an actual tattoo. And you'll have little bits of powder in there, and you'll have little bit of hemorrhage here, and it'll look, we call it stippling or powder tattooing. It will happen when the gun is, let's say, close to the skin, an inch, all the way out to maybe 18 inches, maybe even to 24, depending on the gun.
And that takes us back to your definition of contact, intermediate, and distant or undetermined.
That's correct.
All right. While we're talking about the stippling, and I mentioned from close to contact to intermediate to distance undetermined, this cone, is it like a shotgun? You know, it's not rifled. Does it come out, and the further you go, it spreads further, or does it stay a direct path like the bullet?
It would, yeah, it's very similar to like a shotgun being fired with birdshot. Very similar, although much less powerful. You have little particles, like maybe you have, sometimes gunpowder is ball powder. It's like little balls. And it comes out, and what it does is you'll have a cone of this stuff come out. If you're closer, the stippling around the wound will be really tight. And as you get further away, it gets looser and looser, and the stippling is more faint, and it's less dense, and it's more spread out. And eventually, when you're further enough away, again, depending on the caliber of the gun, the barrel length, the type of powder, the speed of burning of different powders, eventually the powder, since it's so lightweight, the wind resistance, the air resistance, causes it to decelerate, and it'll not have sufficient velocity to penetrate and stick into the skin. So at, like, say, 18 to 24 inches, it loses all its momentum. It may dust the skin and just fall right off. But if you get closer, it's got enough energy to stick in. And you'll see it as you get further away. It gets thinner and thinner, fainter and fainter, and more spread out until eventually you don't get it anymore when you're further enough away.
And that does assist you in making an estimate as far as distance from muzzle to target.
Yes, you can make a reasonably scientific, educated theory about how far within a range.
One last term that we will maybe use is bullet wipe. What is that?
Well, bullet wipe, again, you know, you're firing a bullet down a barrel, and guns are not always the cleanest thing in the world. They're not emission-free. So you can have, depending on the bullet type, the cleanliness of the gun, how often it was shot, how often it was clean, the bullet can actually have soot or dirt or even copper or lead on the side of it that's loose. And when it penetrates into the skin, no matter what the distance, you can have a little bit of that dirt, soot, whatever, wiped on the skin.
Would that be one of the indications trying to distinguish a bullet wound from some other type of puncture wound?
What was that now?
I'm sorry. Would that be one of the things that you would consider in distinguishing a gunshot wound from a puncture wound?
Yeah, it does help. It does help. That would be, yeah, if you have, and also when bullets go in, they have a, they tend to, particularly if they're flying straight, it's really nice to see this. They push in, even though they're going really fast and they're making a hole, they tend to push in, and what you end up with is a marginal abrasion around the entry. So you have a hole, and then around that you may have anywhere from a 1, 2, or 3 millimeter abrasion, like a skin knee, kind of like a little donut of abrasion around it, depending on the bullet, the gun, etc.
Let's go ahead and talk about the facts in this case. On January 14th, 2014, a little after noontime, did you have an occasion to conduct an autopsy on Chad Oulson?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, would you read the stipulation?
Ladies and gentlemen, as I've read to you before, I'm going to read you the stipulation instruction. When lawyers agree that certain facts are true, that is called a stipulation of fact. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, the stipulated facts that you must accept as true is that the counsel for defense and state hereby stipulate and agree that the individual who was shot on January 13th, 2014 inside Theater 10 at Cobb Theater is that of the alleged victim in the above styled case, Chad Wayne Oulson, a human being, and that he is dead.
You mentioned to us that contemporaneous with the autopsy, it's your practice to dictate as you make your findings and also take photographs.
That's correct.
Prior to coming in the courtroom today, did you in fact have an opportunity to review your notes, your autopsy reports, and the photographs that you took in this particular case?
Yes.
Also, prior to coming into the courtroom today, did you have an opportunity to look at photographs of injuries to a hand that was that you were provided information belonged to Nicole Oulson, the wife of Chad Oulson?
Yes.
At the time that you conducted the autopsy, did you know that the facts of the case included one gunshot?
Yes.
At the time of the autopsy, did you know that Mrs. Oulson's hand was also injured by that same one gunshot that killed Mr. Oulson?
I believe so. I think I heard that anecdotally.
Let's go to January 13th, 2014. Were you notified by the hospital in Wesley Chapel that Mr. Oulson had died?
My office was, I have investigators that work in Pasco County, and Dustin Daly, one of my investigators, was notified.
Right. The information that you originally obtained, did it indicate that Dr. Contrell had pronounced him dead at the hospital?
That is in the medical record, yes. It was, that physician did pronounce him dead.
And what is your procedure once you've notified that an individual has been pronounced dead and possibility? And what is your procedure once you're notified?
Well, under 406.11 and 406.12, any person that knows a case like this, where there's a gunshot wound, is obligated to report it to the medical examiner. What we do is we do a death investigation. We get the circumstances, and then the body is transported by my employees to the office. We do weigh and measure the body, do an external exam, and the external exams are pretty routine. What you're looking for is signs of what may have caused death. In a case like Mr. Oulson's, it's unfortunate for him, but at the same time, it's kind of obvious, what caused his death. He had an obvious single gunshot wound of his chest that really caused his death. He also had a grazing gunshot wound to his right wrist area.
Once you are part of that process where you go and you pick up Mr. Oulson's body, bring it back to the medical examiner's office, is it your practice that your office assigns a unique medical examiner report number to this case? In particular, in this particular case, was that number 5140066?
Yes.
Would that report be reflected on the autopsy?
Yes.
And would that number also be used to reference any photographs that you may have taken during the autopsy?
Yes.
Would it also reference to any foreign objects that you would have removed from the body?
Yes.
It's all cross-referenced,
Yes.
that number, all right. Now, I mentioned photographs. Prior to coming into the courtroom today, did you assist the Office of the State Attorney in selecting photographs that you felt would be helpful in explaining your testimony to the jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Those haven't been entered in evidence, may I take a look at them?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought we did look at them. I apologize.
These I haven't seen.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification as JJJ, JPEG number M5140066-017. I'll also show you what's been marked for identification as KKK, JPEG number M5140066-022. And also marked for identification LLL, JPEG photograph M5140066-032. Would you look at each of those photographs and tell me if you recognize them?
Defense has no objection to the admission of those photos or the use of them in explaining
Thank you.
testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels.
Yes, these are photographs of Mr. Oulson shortly before the autopsy was performed, showing his wounds.
And would those photographs be helpful in explaining your testimony to the jury?
Yes.
Let's begin by discussing the external examination. Is it part of the autopsy to take certain measurements, height, weight of the deceased?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
The height of Mr. Oulson what was it determined to be
He
by
was
you?
76 inches or 6'4"
How'd you make that determination?
with a ruler. We just measure him as he's there on the table.
Okay. As far as the weight,
We weigh him on the table, subtracting the weight of the table. At death, he weighed 205 pounds.
so let's talk about the external examination. When you conducted it, I want to begin with the torso area, then we'll work to the extremities, okay?
Okay.
All right, so let's begin with the torso area. During the external examination, did you in fact find an injury in the torso?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that?
He had a gunshot entrance wound of his left side of his chest, basically over where your heart would be.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is, first of all, let's kind of place it where it is. Did you take measurements so that you could go back and recreate where it was specifically in the chest area?
It typically, whatever the wound, if there's a significant wound, it could be any type of wound, will orient the wound generally. And what I do is I measure the distance from the top of the head, and then I typically measure from the level of the shoulder area, and then I measure how far to the right or the left of the midline the wound is.
Okay.
So you're getting a reasonably understandable measurement of where it is, not just on the left side of the chest. A little bit more specific that way.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
And what were your measurements?
16.5 inches below the top of the head, and then 7.5 inches below the level of the mid-shoulders, and then 1.5 inches to the left of the anterior midline. That would be this, right in the midline here. So 1.5 inches over.
And why do you measure from the head down?
Well, it's the closest place. I mean, I know a lot of people measure from the feet up, even when the injury's in the head, but that's less accurate. What I always typically do, if you want to know how far the wound was from the sole of the foot, say, you just take their height and subtract the distance from the head, and you get the sole of the foot. If the injury is below the waist, I'll do it from the sole of the foot. It's just, you're trying to orient it to the body best you can.
And what was it about the injury that you saw from just external examination that led you to conclude that it was a gunshot wound?
Again, the circumstances. I mean, maybe you could say, knowing that people have to report it to the ME and they say, this gentleman has a gunshot wound. And then I see the wound, I do an x-ray on him before doing the autopsy, and he's got a bullet core and a jacket clearly visible in the x-ray, and I've got a hole that a little bit of an atypical look to it, and that's explainable, but he's been shot. It's 100% certainty this is a gunshot wound even before I opened his body.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, at this time I would move into evidence marked for identification JJJ, next in order.
58. That'll be admitted as 58.
KKK, next in order.
59, it'll be admitted as 59.
And LLL.
60, it'll be admitted as state 60.
Your Honor, at this time may I publish the photograph, specifically State's Exhibit number 58. May the witness step down.
You may.
All right, you step down with me, please. Now, let me show you.
You may. I probably will too. Hang on a minute. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Burton.
Let me show you State's Exhibit number 54. 8, is this one of the photographs that you selected that would be helpful in explaining your testimony?
Yes.
I'm going to hold it for you so that you can point and talk. But please explain to us, where is the entrance room?
This is the entrance room, right above the ruler.
All right. There's another object about the 11 o'clock position. What is that?
Well, it's an abrasion. It's like a impact scrape, I think. It's got a little bruise around it. In my opinion, it's probably most likely related to the gunshot wound. Maybe it's because he had this graze first, and I think we'll explain that. But it may be flesh or something coming out of one of the intermediate targets and hitting his chest. It's also possible that it could be something from medical intervention. Sometimes you'll see when people are being CPR, they'll have scrapes or things. It's a little bit unusual to be that. I would favor it's probably related to the gunshot wound in some way. Maybe a piece of his own tissue hit his chest at high speed, or I don't want to be too political, but the other injured party may be something from her that hit his chest. It's not unusual to see that. And a little bit less likely, but reasonable, it could be something from people doing a bunch of CPR on him, and he did get CPR.
Now, as you look at the wound, and as a layperson, it's not perfectly round. Explain to us the shape that we have.
Well, the caliber of the gun, it's a handgun, it's a .380 automatic or semi-automatic, so bullets will fly generally right out of the gun if it hits a person. It's spinning perfectly. And at the range we're talking about, it's a flat trajectory. So it's going to make a nice punched out round hole if it hits the skin perpendicular. Nice punched out round hole. If it doesn't, it'll make an oval shaped hole. Really nice. This is very unusual looking. It's triangular kind of and weird looking. That's because this is a tumbling bullet. The bullet has already struck 2 intermediate targets, and it's at least doing this.
Okay. And that's the reason for the difference.
That's correct.
Okay. You may have a seat.
Are you gonna do any more right now?
No, we're going to go. No, but you will have to come back, I guess.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Ready, Your Honor? I want to continue with our discussion as far as the torso area and the gunshot wound to the chest. I want to go from external to internal. Did you in fact conduct an internal examination as it relates to the gunshot wound in the chest?
Yes.
And what were your findings?
Well, the bullet went through his skin. It went through the underneath his 4th rib and nicked his 4th rib. Then it went through his heart. And bullets are a lead core with a copper jacket around them. So a lot of times when a bullet passes through tissue, it'll shed the jacket. The jacket will come off, the lead core will continue. So in his heart was the jacket, and then the bullet continued and ended up in his right lung. I mean, the core of the bullet continued and ended up in his right lung.
Is there a way to determine front to back, back to front, left to right? Can you orientate the wound tract in a way to give us some idea later on in our discussions about where an individual was?
Within reason. I mean, I describe this as front to back. I mean, that's pretty easy. His front to his back. It also crossed, a little bit of a left to right trajectory. Bullets generally travel straight, but this, hits human flesh, it's wobbling, so it could deflect several degrees when it hit his wrist. Then it hits his spouse's fingers, could deflect a little bit, and then it goes into tissue. But generally, bullets fly straight with some caveats. Particularly lower velocity handgun bullets tend to fly straighter in tissue than some of the more high velocity ones.
During the autopsy, did you actually recover a foreign object?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, it was a medium caliber jacket of a bullet and a core of that bullet.
And where was it found?
Well, the core was in his right lung, near the midline, and his jacket was in his heart.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let me show you State's Exhibit number 57. It has been opened. Would you look at that, please, sir? May I just stand here for a moment, Your Honor? Do you recognize the package inside State's Exhibit number 57?
Yes, this is the envelope that I prepared and signed with this recovered material with my signature on the evidence tape and the date and the time.
Okay. And would that be the foreign object that you just described to the jury?
Yes.
What exhibit was that?
57, Your Honor.
57, thank you.
Let me talk a little bit about the wound itself and the organs that it impacted. Was the heart damaged by the projectile?
Yes.
If a person is shot and a projectile hits the heart, does the individual immediately drop to the ground, or is there some time delay?
Depends on the circumstances and what's going on in their head, you know. They don't have to drop. They can drop. I've been shot and just sit down, but, you know, I've had and know of and been consulted on cases where they run far. They do a lot of things, hundreds of feet. They can run, they can talk. So no, I mean, the human body can keep functioning for a period of time unless it's hit in the central nervous system. If you don't damage the brain or spinal cord, there's no guarantee the body's just going to drop. You can keep going.
Okay. Hypothetically, if someone was shot in the chest and then turned and then took several steps over 2, 3, 4 seconds and then collapsed, would that be consistent or inconsistent with the type of wound that Mr. Oulson sustained?
Consistent.
Could while that person, hypothetically, in that same situation, would that person still have the wherewithal to make statements?
Sure. No, there's definitely could still talk, no doubt about it.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I want to go to the extremities at this time. If you would refer to State's Exhibit number 59 and 60, what I'd like to do is start with 59, and let's discuss that, then we'll do 60.
Okay.
All right. State's Exhibit number 59, what is that?
That's a photograph of the, again, anatomical position, the lateral portion of his right hand and wrist.
Okay. Show us using your hand, what's the lateral?
It's right here.
Okay. Part of your autopsy, did you in fact examine that wound?
Yes.
Is it characterized as a grazed wound?
It is a classic grazed wound.
May the witness step down and use
He
his
may.
photograph to further his testimony?
Yes. Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask the court to instruct the prosecutor to not speak to the witness unless we're on the record
Okay.
during his testimony.
All right. Don't talk to the witness unless we're on the record.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good.
Are we on the record?
We are.
Dr. Thogmartin, we're gonna talk about both pictures so the judge doesn't have to keep coming up and down, okay? Okay. All right, thank you. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 59. I'll hold it for you. Go ahead and explain to us what are we looking at.
Well, this is what it is right here, the wrist area, the top part. And what you're seeing there is the grazed gunshot wound. It's basically right here on the lateral side of his wrist. But if it's held like this, it's on the top. He's holding his arm like this, okay? Classic grazed gunshot wound.
Left or right hand?
Right hand.
Okay. Now we see some little red bumps, marks, whatever, just below it. What is that?
That's stippling. It's not a very good picture of it. The other picture is better. But that's the powder tattooing or stippling. That's gunpowder hitting the skin and embedding in the skin.
Why do we not see it in the area of the wound?
Because the gunshot wound is coming like this, going right across the top. And it's not going to be here. It's going to be on the side that's facing the gun. The gun's here, bullet's coming this way, powder's coming, it's here. So you're only going to see it in this area. You won't see it on the top because it's parallel to the direction of the flying powder. It's not going to stick into something. It's flying at the same direction as you understand. Like it's going to hit the front, it's not going to hit the top. It's flying over the top.
We're going to do the next photo. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 60. We talked about the term stippling, so we just did the grazed wound. Now, what does this picture represent?
This, you can see the
Let me
fingers.
just put it on right. State's Exhibit number 60.
This is again his right hand and forearm. The wound is up here. You can actually see kind of a little divot. This is kind of like the bullet's eye view or a gun eye view of it. You can see the trough or the divot that was cut by the bullet. And then all these red dots, that's powder tattooing or stippling. Unburned or partially burned gunpowder that came out of the gun and stuck in the skin, and you can see stuck in enough where actually the body's, has a little hemorrhage associated with it. A little bit of a red dot because blood vessels are broken under the skin, just like with a tattoo, if you go to a tattoo parlor.
And can the stippling be used as a factor to determine distance, muzzle to target?
Yes, automatically when you see stippling, this makes it an intermediate range of fire. So it could be, in the textbooks, it's 1 inch all the way out to 18 or even 24 inches. This is not 1 inch, in my opinion. I'd say, if you asked me to make a scientific estimate of what it would be, I'd say anywhere from 4 to 15 would be within the realm of possibility, but it's hard to know. You have to know so many things. Ammunition, powder, all these different possibilities, and test it on human skin and you could get a more accurate range, but 4 to 15 is good. I think that would work.
Scientifically, do we test on human skin?
No, but you can have other things you test on, but it's not going to give you the same. I mean, I'm not aware of any really good test to duplicate powder tattooing on live human skin. And I think, doing it on anything alive would probably be bad.
Now, you refer to his hand as being an intermediate object.
Yes.
All right. Hypothetically, if there is a second intermediate object, the tattooing that we see on the second intermediate object can, where it is located, assist in orientating where one is in relation to the other because of the blockage of tattoo.
Right. You can see the amount of tattooing, the intensity of it, where it's located, and the fact that there's one gunshot wound. It's unique to be able to position a person's arm and one person's hand or arm and another person's hand and the wound all in one. So you can really, at the instant the bullet's flying, we know where at least two people's extremities are in relation to the torso of the decedent.
Please have a seat. When we began discussing the autopsy, I asked you whether or not you were aware that this was a one-shot case and whether or not you were aware that Mrs. Olson was also injured by the same gunshot.
Yes.
You indicated anecdotally, yes, you were aware of that.
Yes.
Now, since the time of the autopsy, have you had an occasion to look at photographs that were taken approximately 2 days after Mrs. Olson sustained her injury?
Yes.
And from reviewing those photographs, are you able to explain to us her hand position when her hand was injured by the same shot?
Yes.
All right. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibits 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 that are in evidence. I'm just going to give you a chance to look at those photographs, and I'll have some questions for you. What I'd like for you to do, Dr. Thogmartin, would you select one of the photographs that you think would be helpful in describing the type of wound that Mrs. Olson suffered so that you can describe it and explain it to the jury? All right. And would you also select a photograph that would assist you in explaining stippling as we did with Mr. Olson? And if it requires more than one photograph to get all of her fingers in.
I think I can get by with 2.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, may he step down? May I use the 2 photographs for him to explain his testimony?
Yes, he can, and I have seen the photos, so you can show them to the jury. You guys, yes?
Okay. Right. As we discussed with Mr. Olson, I have before you State's Exhibit number 15. Of course, you can orientate it the way, how do you want it orientated so you can?
I like it like that.
Okay. State's Exhibit number 15. Right. We talked about the type of wound as we did with Mr. Olson and your findings in the autopsy. From the photograph, are you able to describe the type of wound that she received?
Well, this is a perforating gunshot wound of her left ring finger, right between the most distal knuckle and the middle one, okay? It goes right through that finger. And in this side, out the bottom side. And then it grazes her pinky finger going this way, going kind of that way as I'm pointing, by the look of it.
Are there any other fingers that are damaged by the bullet?
Well, there's stippling on her hand.
We'll get to that in a second, just the
No,
injury.
just those 2 fingers is all I see.
All right. And from the photograph, can you determine the path of the bullet?
Yes, in my opinion, it's coming in this. Her hand is not like this. Her hand is kind of like this, and it's hard to get my hand because my ring finger wants to do what my pinky finger doesn't want to do. But anyway, the bullet comes in like this, goes through this ring finger, and then comes right across here, and then continues on.
Okay. And why don't you, I'll be your your dummy, okay?
Okay.
Go ahead and use this area and position the hand the way that, at least one of the variations where how the hands and the fingers have to be spread so that we receive this type of injury.
Okay, so her hand is somewhat, somewhat right here. Maybe we step back a little bit more. It's here, and I believe that her pinky finger's bent a little bit like this, so the bullet comes in, goes through this finger, scrapes the top of that finger, and then goes into Mr. Oulson's chest. But her hand could be on his chest. I can't tell if it's, and I think her wrist is a little bit down like this. It's coming up because the stippling is mostly here. So her hand could be here, could be on his chest. I can't really tell exactly. From a forensic pathology context, it's best to consider where her hand would be according to what she said, what other people say, and what the environment dictates. But again, anywhere in here are anatomically and scientifically possible. But you have to take that in context.
Let's go ahead and couple that with, you stare at this exhibit. The next photograph, I'll let you orientate it because we were talking about stippling, and you believe State's exhibit number 16 will assist you in describing your testimony.
Again, this is her hand held like this.
I'll hold this way.
Okay. Her left hand. There's the bullet wound. And I thought this depicted the stippling. This is quite obviously stippling. It's 2 days delayed. It looks a little different than it would on somebody that's freshly stippled. 2 days delayed, but it's still there, and it's going to take a long time for it to wear off, if ever. You may actually have permanent tattooing there. This is much more dispersed than on the decedent's wrist, which indicates to me most likely her hand was behind his wrist.
Here, you can adjust.
Yes. If his wrist is here, her hand is somewhere in here. Okay? It's not over here and his hand's there. I've got much more intense stippling here, and then I've got less stippling here. It's my scientific opinion that it's closer to, her hand is closer to the husband than his own hand is to himself.
Okay. You have a seat, please. I'd like to go back to the gunshot wound to the chest. You indicated to us earlier, basically front to back with just a slight deviation. Is that correct?
Right. It comes in right just to the left of the midline and then ends up, one of the pieces ends up a little bit to the right of the midline, while the jacket is pretty much right underneath in line with the wound.
From the path of the projectile through the body, can you make a determination the variations that the body could be in that would be consistent with that trajectory?
Yes.
Would using a rod help you do that?
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach on an objection?
Yes. Martin, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. You're welcome to do so as well.
Okay.
And just be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.